Her father's claws rake across her shoulders as he tears away her only protection, the worn cloak that barely kept her warm. "You're a drain, a defect." His voice holds no love, only disgust. "Go, die somewhere we don't have to watch." The pack surrounds her, a circle of amber eyes and bared teeth, driving her past the boundary stones into the howling blizzard. Her sister won't meet her eyes. Her mother turned away hours ago. Vesper stumbles forward, driven by instinct rather than hope. There is no hope for a wolf who cannot shift, an omega deemed worthless in a winter of famine. The cold devours her inch by inch. She falls. Snow buries her. This is how she dies, unloved, unmourned, unfound. Miles away, a king stops mid-breath. Golden eyes flash. A scent hits him like lightning, mate, death, mine. The most feared predator alive tears through the storm with one thought burning. Find her, claim her, destroy anyone who touched her. The girl left to freeze is about to become the most protected creature in existence, and her pack will learn that abandoning her was a fatal mistake. The scent led him through hell. Valerius tore through the blizzard in his wolf form, a massive black beast that dwarfed ancient trees. His paws barely touched the snow before launching forward again, muscles burning, lungs screaming. The storm didn't slow him. Nothing would slow him. That scent, gods, that scent, pulled him forward like a chain around his throat, sweet and dying and his. His second-in-command had tried to follow. Valerius had snarled once, a sound that promised death, and the warrior had wisely fallen back. This hunt was his alone. This salvation was his burden. This rage, oh, this rage was entirely new. He'd never felt rage before. He'd never felt anything before. For 32 years, King Valerius had ruled with legendary coldness. No mercy, no emotion, no weakness. He'd executed traitors without flinching, negotiated treaties without caring, bedded females without feeling. His heart was ice, his mind was steel, and his reputation was built on the terrifying fact that nothing moved him. Until a scent on the wind had brought him to his knees. The mate bond had slammed into his chest like a battering ram, so violent he'd shifted mid-step and vomited in the snow. Every nerve ending had ignited. His beast had roared to the surface, feral and possessive, howling one word over and over. Mine. Mine. Dying. Mine. He found her half buried in a snowdrift, her lips blue, her skin gray as death. Valerius shifted back to human form, his bare skin impervious to the cold that was killing her. He dropped to his knees and dug frantically, his hands that had torn out throats and signed execution orders, shaking as they uncovered her small, frozen body. She wasn't breathing. Something inside him shattered, not metaphorically. He felt it crack down the center of his chest, felt 32 years of ice break apart and flood his veins with molten terror. His beast clawed at his insides, screaming, demanding, "Save her, save her, save her." "No," his voice came out broken, unrecognizable. "No, you don't get to leave, you're mine." He pulled her against his chest, and the mate bond roared to life with agonizing intensity. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was a violent, primal claiming that tore through both of them like lightning. His wolf surged forward, forcing his essence into her dying body, a transfer of life force so intimate it was nearly obscene. Heat poured from his skin into hers. His heart, that cold, dead thing, suddenly beat hard enough to crack ribs, and he felt it echoing into her chest, demanding her heart answer. His breath became hers. His life became hers. The mate bond wrapped around them both like iron chains, binding them so tightly that for a moment he couldn't tell where he ended and she began. Her body convulsed. She gasped, a horrible rattling sound, and her eyes flew open. They were the color of storm clouds, wide with terror and confusion and pain. She looked at him, this massive, naked male holding her against his chest, and tried to scream. Nothing came out but a whimper. "SHH," the gentleness in his voice shocked him. He'd never been gentle in his life. "You're safe, I have you." She didn't believe him. Of course she didn't. She shook violently, her frozen body fighting against his warmth, and tried to push away from him. So weak, so fragile, so completely, devastatingly his. The claiming mark burned on his chest where their skin touched, an ancient symbol that appeared only for true mates, glowing faintly through his skin. He knew the same mark was searing itself onto her chest right now, branding her as his just as surely as she'd branded him. "Who?" Her voice cracked, her teeth chattered. "Who are you?" "Valerius." He wrapped his arms around her more firmly, letting his unnatural heat seep into her frozen flesh. "And you are mine." Her eyes rolled back. She went limp in his arms. The beast inside him roared in panic, but he could feel her heartbeat now, faint but steady. She lived. She breathed. She was his and she lived. He shifted back to his wolf form carefully, gently taking her into his jaws by the back of her soaked dress. She was so small, so light, barely more than bones and frozen fabric. Rage ignited again, not the hot, wild fury from before, but something colder, more dangerous. Someone had done this to her. Someone had taken his mate, and left her to die in the snow. He would find them. He would make them understand exactly what they'd done. But first, he would take her home. The journey back to his fortress should have taken hours. He made it in one, pushing his body past all limits, his jaws locked carefully around her, his beast snarling at every sound in the forest. When his warriors appeared at the border, he nearly attacked them on instinct. "Sire," his second-in-command Marcus shifted to human form, eyes wide. "Is that?" Valerius's growl shook snow from the trees. Every wolf within hearing range dropped to their bellies in submission. The message was clear: approach and die. Marcus wisely stepped back, but his voice carried. "The healers are ready. We've prepared the king's chamber." The king's chamber. His private sanctuary where no one was permitted, where he'd slept alone for 3 decades. Yes, she would be there. She would be safe there. She would be his there. He carried her through the fortress gates, ignoring the shocked gasps of his pack, the whispers that followed. The emotionless king, the merciless ruler, carried a half-frozen girl in his jaws like she was made of glass. It should have looked weak. Instead, every wolf who saw his eyes, wild, possessive, absolutely feral, understood. Their king had found his mate. And heaven help anyone who tried to take her from him. He laid her on his bed, shifted back to human form, and didn't leave her side even when the healers arrived. They worked around him, warming her slowly, carefully, while he sat beside her and felt things he'd never imagined possible. Fear, rage, possession, protectiveness. And underneath it all, burning like a star in his chest, mine, mine, mine. Vesper, he didn't know her name yet, but he would learn everything about her, shivered in her sleep. Without thinking, he climbed into the bed and pulled her against his chest, wrapping his much larger body around hers. His heat, his protection, his claim. The emotionless king, who'd ruled with ice and iron, buried his face in her hair, and felt his frozen heartbeat for the first time in his life. She was his salvation, his destruction, his everything. And he would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt her again. Warmth. That was the first thing Vesper felt as consciousness dragged her back from the void. Warmth everywhere, surrounding her, underneath her, seeping into bones that had been frozen for so long she'd forgotten what heat felt like. It was obscene, this warmth. Decadent. Wrong. She should be dead. Her eyes opened slowly, lashes heavy, vision blurred. Fabric touched her skin, soft, impossibly soft. Silk. She'd touched silk once in the Alpha's house before they'd thrown her out. This was softer than even that. The bed beneath her felt like sleeping on a cloud, nothing like the thin mat on the floor she'd been given in her father's house, the one that smelled of mildew and shame. A fire roared somewhere close. She could hear it crackling, could feel its heat on her face. The room smelled of pine and smoke and something else, something wild and masculine that made her pulse quicken with instinctive fear. Vesper tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached. Her fingers, she looked down and saw them wrapped in clean white bandages. Frostbite. She remembered the blackened tips, the way they'd stopped hurting as the cold devoured them. Someone had tended them. Someone had saved them. Someone had saved her. The memory slammed back all at once. The blizzard. The scent that had cut through her dying haze. The massive black wolf. the naked man who'd held her like she was precious. The heat that had poured from his body into hers, so intense it had felt like burning alive. The eyes, golden and wild and absolutely feral, staring down at her with an expression she couldn't name. And his voice, rough as gravel, "You are mine." Panic clawed up her throat. Where was she? Who had taken her? Why would anyone save a defective Omega who couldn't even shift? "You're awake." Vesper's head snapped toward the voice, and her heart stopped. He sat in the shadows near the fire, so still she hadn't noticed him. Massive didn't begin to describe him. Even seated, he looked capable of tearing the world apart with his bare hands. Shoulders broader than any wolf she'd ever seen. Arms corded with muscle that spoke of violence and power. His face was carved from stone, sharp jaw, cruel mouth, a nose that had been broken and healed at least twice. His hair was black as midnight, hanging loose around his face. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her. Pure gold, predator's eyes. They tracked her every movement with an intensity that made her feel like prey. She knew those eyes. Every wolf in every pack knew those eyes. "No," the word fell from her lips as a whisper. "No, no, no." "Easy." He didn't move, but his voice rolled through the room like distant thunder. "You're safe." She couldn't say it. Terror had locked her throat. King Valerius, the alpha of all alphas, the monster who ruled the wolf territories with merciless cruelty. She'd heard the stories her whole life. He'd executed an entire pack for breaking his laws, had ripped the throat from his own uncle for challenging him, felt nothing when he killed. He was inhuman, unstoppable, utterly without mercy. And she was in his bed. Vesper lunged for the edge of the mattress. Her legs tangled in the silk sheets. There were so many layers, so much softness, and she fell hard onto the stone floor. Pain exploded through her knees, but she didn't stop. She crawled toward the door, bandaged hands slipping on polished stone, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. "Stop." One word, quiet, absolute. Her body obeyed before her mind could process the command. She froze, trembling halfway to the door. Alpha command. Of course he could use alpha command. He was the king. She had no defense against it, no wolf to protect her from the weight of his will. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. She heard him move closer, and her breath came in short, panicked gasps. This was it. She disrespected him by trying to run. He would kill her now, and at least it would be faster than freezing to death. "Look at me." She couldn't disobey. Her body turned, still on her hands and knees, and she looked up at him. He stood over her, this massive male who could crush her skull with one hand, and his expression was wrong. She'd expected cold rage, cruel amusement, perhaps hunger. Instead, his golden eyes held something that looked almost like pain. "Mine," he said again, softer this time. Not a command, a revelation. "Please," her voice broke. I don't understand. Why did you save me? I'm nothing, I'm defective, I can't even shift. There's nothing." The words tumbled out, desperate and pathetic. "There's nothing about me worth saving." Something flickered across his face. His jaw tightened. Those golden eyes flashed with an emotion she couldn't name, except it looked dangerously close to rage. But not at her. Never at her. Then he did something that shattered every story she'd ever heard about the merciless king. He knelt. Valerius, the alpha of all alphas, the monster who made grown warriors tremble, lowered himself to the floor until he was eye level with her. Slowly, giving her time to see it coming, he reached out and cupped her face with one massive hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, gentle, so impossibly gentle. "Who hurt you?" His voice was barely a whisper, but she heard the fury underneath it, a cold, lethal rage that promised retribution. "Who left you in the snow to die?" The question broke something inside her that had been holding for too long. Not his power, not his command, his gentleness. The way he touched her like she might break. The way he looked at her like she mattered. The sob came from somewhere deep in her chest, a sound she'd been holding back since her father had torn the cloak from her shoulders. Then another, and another. Suddenly she was weeping, great, ugly sobs that shook her whole body, tears streaming down her face onto his hand. "My father," she choked out between sobs. "My pack. They said I was a burden. that I should have died at birth. The winter was hard and they had no food and I couldn't even shift to hunt, so what good was I? And they were right, I'm useless. No. His other hand came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears with a reverence that felt religious. No, little one, they were wrong, about all of it. But I can't shift, I'm broken. You are not broken. His voice turned fierce, commanding, but his touch remained achingly gentle. You are rare, you are precious, and you are mine. She stared at him through her tears, this monster with careful hands, and couldn't reconcile the stories with the male kneeling before her. I don't understand. You will. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead against hers in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. But first, you will heal, you will eat, you will rest, and you will never. His voice dropped to a growl that vibrated through her bones. Never doubt your worth again. Why? The question came out broken. Why do you care? His answer was simple, absolute, devastating. Because the mate bond chose you. Because my beast recognized you the moment I caught your scent. Because you are the other half of my soul, and I would raise kingdoms to ash before I let anyone touch you again. Vesper's breath caught. Mate bond. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Defective omegas didn't get mates, especially not. The king doesn't have a mate, she whispered. His smile was sharp, possessive, and for the first time since waking, she saw the monster everyone feared. The king does now. He scooped her up effortlessly, cradling her against his chest as he stood. She should have been terrified. Instead, exhaustion and shock and too many emotions crashed over her all at once. She sagged against him, her tears soaking his shirt, her body shaking with sobs she'd held back for years. And the monster who'd never felt anything held her like she was made of glass, carrying her back to his bed, whispering promises against her hair that sounded like threats to anyone who'd hurt her. Sleep, he commanded softly, laying her down and pulling the silk sheets over her. I'll keep watch. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand, wanted to protest that she didn't deserve this softness. But her body had other ideas. Exhaustion pulled her under like a tide. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was him settling back into his chair by the fire, those golden eyes never leaving her face, standing guard over a girl who'd been thrown away. Protecting what everyone else had deemed worthless. Marcus had served King Valerius for 15 years. In that time, he'd seen his king execute traitors without blinking, negotiate treaties with ruthless precision, and face down challenger after challenger with cold indifference. He'd never seen emotion cross that stone-carved face. Until today. Marcus stood outside the king's private chamber, waiting for permission to enter. Through the heavy door, he could hear nothing, which meant Valerius was using a sound barrier. Whatever was happening with the small female he'd carried in yesterday, the king wanted no witnesses. The door opened. Valerius stepped out, closing it silently behind him. His shirt was rumpled, his hair loose around his face. He looked like he hadn't slept. But it was his eyes that made Marcus take an involuntary step back. They were burning gold, feral and dangerous, the eyes of a beast barely leashed. Report. The king's voice was deceptively calm. Marcus had learned long ago that when Valerius went quiet, people died. We've identified her pack, sire. The Silverpine Territory, north border. Alpha Gregor commands. Something flickered across Valerius's face, there and gone so quickly Marcus almost missed it. Rage. Pure, incandescent rage. Continue. They're spreading a story through the territories, claiming she died of natural causes during the winter famine. A tragedy, they're calling it. The weak Omega who couldn't survive the harsh season. Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. They're presenting themselves as victims of circumstance, gaining sympathy. The temperature in the hallway dropped. Frost formed on the stone walls. Marcus had seen Valerius lose control of his power exactly twice before. Both times resulted in mass casualties. Natural causes. Each word fell like a stone into still water. They left my mate to freeze to death in a blizzard and call it natural causes. Sire. What else? Marcus pulled out a folded parchment, his hand steady despite his racing heart. Alpha Gregor sent this message to the surrounding packs 3 days ago. We intercepted it. Valerius took the letter, read it in silence. Marcus watched his king's jaw tighten, watched his knuckles turn white around the paper. The letter was brief. The defective one has been handled. The pack is stronger for it. We ask for your understanding during these difficult times. Handled? Valerius's voice was a whisper. Somehow that was more terrifying than a roar. He calls murdering my mate handling her. There's more, Marcus braced himself. We have witnesses, pack members who saw the exile. They stripped her of her cloak in the middle of a blizzard. Her own father tore it from her shoulders. Her mother and siblings watched. No one intervened. The frost on the walls deepened. Marcus could see his breath now. How long? Valerius asked quietly. Sire, how long did they leave her out there before I found her? Marcus had been dreading this question. Our scouts estimate 4 hours, maybe 5. 4 hours, in a blizzard, without a cloak. A fragile omega with no wolf to protect her from the cold. Valerius turned and put his fist through the stone wall. The impact echoed through the fortress like thunder. When he pulled his hand back, bloody and already healing, his expression was eerily calm. Prepare a message for Alpha Gregor. Marcus pulled out parchment and ink with steady hands. Years of service had taught him not to flinch. Valerius's words were measured, precise. Return what you stole. Marcus frowned. Sire, they'll interpret that as... They'll interpret it however their guilt allows. Valerius's smile was a razor's edge. Let's see how Alpha Gregor responds when he thinks I'm simply demanding restitution for stolen property. And when he refuses, then he confirms what he did. Either way, he condemns himself with his own words. Marcus sealed the letter with the king's mark, a black wolf's head that made lesser alphas tremble. I'll send it immediately. No, Valerius's hand caught his wrist. I want you to deliver it personally. I want you to look Alpha Gregor in the eyes and watch his reaction. I want to know if he feels any remorse at all for what he did. And if he doesn't. The king's smile never reached his eyes. Then I'll know exactly how much suffering he's earned. Marcus left within the hour, taking 2 warriors with him. The journey to Silver Pine territory took a day and a half. When they arrived at the pack borders, they were met with the arrogance of wolves who thought themselves untouchable. Alpha Gregor was a large male, broad-shouldered and graying at the temples. He received the king's messenger in his great hall, surrounded by his warriors, confident and dismissive. King Valerius sends his regards, Marcus said, extending the sealed letter. Gregor took it, broke the seal, read it in silence. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Marcus's wolf snarl inside him. Return what I stole, Gregor crumpled the letter in his fist. Tell your king that we cast out defective refuse. If he found some dying omega in the snow, that's his problem, not ours. We owe him nothing. The girl was a burden, a shame to our bloodline. We simply corrected nature's mistake. The hall went silent. Every wolf present heard the words. Every wolf would serve as witness to this moment. Marcus smiled coldly. You should know, Alpha Gregor, that the defective refuse you speak of is King Valerius's mate. The color drained from Gregor's face. Around the hall, wolves began to back away from their alpha instinct overriding loyalty. They understood what Gregor clearly didn't. He just signed his own death warrant. That's impossible. She couldn't shift. She was... His mate, Marcus repeated, savoring every word. The king's true mate marked and claimed, and you tried to murder her. Gregor's arrogance crumbled, replaced by dawning horror. We didn't know. How could we have known? She showed no signs. Ignorance is not innocence. Marcus turned to leave, then paused. The king asked me to observe your reaction, to see if you felt any remorse. He looked back at Gregor with contempt. You called her refuse. You called attempted murder correcting nature's mistake. You feel no remorse at all, do you? Gregor opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. That's what I thought. Marcus walked toward the doors. I'll relay your response to the king. I suggest you prepare your pack for war." "Wait," Gregor's voice cracked with panic. "We can negotiate restitution, anything he wants." "What he wants," Marcus said softly, "is justice for his mate. And Alpha Gregor, I've served King Valerius for 15 years. I've never seen him feel anything." He smiled without humor. "Until her, now he feels everything. And right now he feels rage." Marcus left the hall to the sound of Gregor's desperate shouting. That night, as Marcus reported back to his king, Valerius listened in absolute silence. When the report ended, he spoke one sentence: "Mobilize the army." Within hours, 500 of the king's elite warriors moved towards Silver Pine territory in complete silence. They traveled through the night, shadows among shadows, until they formed a perfect circle around the pack borders. In his chamber, Valerius stood at the window, watching the moon rise. Behind him, Vesper slept in his bed, finally warm, finally safe, finally healing. She'd asked him before she drifted off if her pack knew she was alive. He'd stroked her hair and told her not to worry about it. Now his army surrounded the wolves who'd thrown her away. They would wake at dawn to find themselves trapped, outnumbered 10-1, with no escape and no mercy coming. Gregor had called her refuse. He'd called her murder a correction. He'd felt no remorse. Valerius's reflection in the window showed a male transformed, eyes burning gold, expression carved from vengeance, every line of his body promising retribution. They'd tried to kill his mate. They'd left her to die in the snow while they returned to their warm homes and full bellies. War wasn't coming. War had already arrived. And Alpha Gregor was about to learn exactly what happened when you hurt what belonged to the king. Vesper woke to the scent of food and flinched so hard she nearly fell out of bed. "Easy." His voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and steady. "You're safe." Her heart hammered as she turned to find Valerius sitting in a chair beside the bed, a tray of food balanced on his lap. Steam rose from a bowl of soup, carrying the rich aroma of meat and herbs. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but years of conditioning held her frozen. Food was earned, not given, and she'd never earned anything. "I brought you breakfast." He lifted the tray slightly, offering, "You need to eat." She stared at the food, then at him, trying to understand the trap. There had to be a trap. No one gave without taking. No one offered without expecting payment. And she had nothing to give, especially not to a king. "What do you want from me?" The question came out small, defeated. Something flickered across his face, that same expression she'd seen yesterday when she'd called herself worthless. Pain, anger, not at her, never at her. "I want you to eat." He stood slowly, giving her time to track his movements, and approached the bed. Each step was deliberate, measured, like he was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. "That's all, just eat." He set the tray on the bed beside her and stepped back, giving her space. She looked down at the soup, thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, more food than she'd seen in months, and felt her throat close. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because you're mine to protect." "But she gestured helplessly at herself. "I'm nothing. I can't shift, I can't hunt, I can't fight, I can't even," her voice broke. "I can't even keep myself alive." Valerius moved then, faster than she could track, and she flinched violently, arms coming up to protect her face. The blow never came. When she dared to look, he'd frozen mid-reach, his hand suspended in the air between them, his expression devastated. "Have they hit you?" His voice was deadly quiet. She couldn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. He withdrew his hand slowly, lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed, carefully, so carefully, leaving space between them. "I will never strike you. Do you understand me? Never." She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him, but belief required trust. And trust had been beaten out of her years ago. "May I touch you?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I need to change your bandages, your fingers, the frostbite needs tending." She looked down at her wrapped hands, remembered the blackened tips, the way they'd stopped hurting as death crept in. Slowly, shakily, she extended her hands toward him. "Thank you." He took her hands in his, so massive they engulfed hers completely, and began unwrapping the bandages with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Tell me if I hurt you." He wouldn't hurt her. Somehow she knew that, even through her fear. His touch was reverent, careful, like she was something precious. No one had ever touched her like this. The bandages came away to reveal healing skin. The blackened tips were pink now, new flesh growing where death had claimed territory. She stared in shock. "How?" "The mate bond," he explained quietly, reaching for a jar of salve. "My life force is healing you. It will take time, but you'll be whole again." He began applying the salve with feather-light touches. "You'll be able to use your hands, play instruments if you wish, create art, whatever you want." Whatever she wanted, as if she'd ever been allowed once. "Why would you waste your power on me?" She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Your pack must think you're insane. The great king, wasting his strength on defective." "If I hear you call yourself defective one more time," he interrupted, his tone sharp enough to make her flinch, then immediately softening, "I'm going to be very displeased. Not with you," he added quickly, seeing her fear. "With the ones who taught you to think so little of yourself." He finished wrapping her hands in fresh bandages. Then, in a move that shocked her into stillness, he lifted one bandaged hand to his lips and pressed the gentlest kiss to her knuckles. "You are not defective, you are not waste, you are not burden." Each word was punctuated with another soft kiss. "You are my mate, you are precious, you are mine." Tears burned her eyes. "I don't know how to be those things." "Then I'll teach you." He set her hand down gently, picked up the soup bowl and held it out. "Starting with this, eat for me, please." The please shattered something inside her. Kings didn't say please. Kings didn't ask. They commanded, demanded, took. But Valerius sat before her with patient eyes and a bowl of soup, waiting for her permission to care for her. She took the bowl with shaking hands. The soup was still warm. She lifted the spoon to her lips, tasted it, and nearly sobbed. Rich, savory, wonderful. She'd forgotten food could taste like this instead of like obligation and resentment. "Good," he murmured, watching her eat with an expression she couldn't name. "That's good, little one." She ate slowly, and he didn't rush her. When she'd finished half the bowl and couldn't manage more, he took it from her without judgment. "Rest now." "You keep saying that." She pulled the silk sheets around herself, still not quite believing they were real. "Rest, eat, you're safe, but you haven't told me what happens next." "Next you heal." "And then?" His jaw tightened. "Then we deal with the ones who hurt you." Fear spiked through her. "My pack is currently surrounded by my army," he said matter-of-factly. "They won't harm anyone. Yet. But your former alpha and I are going to have a conversation about what he did to you." "Please," the word burst from her. "Please don't hurt them because of me. I'm not worth." He moved faster than thought, his hands framing her face, golden eyes burning into hers. "Stop. Stop deciding your worth based on how they treated you. They were wrong, Vesper. They were cruel and they were wrong." It was the first time he'd said her name. He must have learned it from his scouts. Hearing it in his voice, spoken with such fierce tenderness, cracked something open inside her chest. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "Of me. Of this, of you, of feeling." She struggled for words. "Of feeling like maybe I matter and then finding out I was wrong again." His thumbs stroked her cheeks, wiping away tears she didn't realize were falling. "You matter. To me, you matter more than anything in this world. And I know you don't believe that yet. I know trust isn't given, it's earned. So I'll earn it." He leaned closer, pressed his forehead to hers. "However long it takes, I'll prove to you that you're safe with me." The mate bond hummed between them, warm and growing stronger. She could feel it now, a golden thread connecting her chest to his, pulsing with life and heat and something that felt dangerously close to belonging. "Can you," she hesitated, "can you hold me just for a moment?" His answer was to pull her carefully into his arms, tucking her against his chest like she was made of glass. His heat surrounded her, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She felt his hand stroke her hair, slow and soothing. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." For the first time in her life, Vesper let herself lean into someone's touch instead of flinching away from it. Let herself be held instead of bracing for pain. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, she was worth protecting after all. The king, who'd never felt anything, held her, like she was his entire world. And slowly, achingly, she began to believe he meant it. The healer's name was Alara, and she'd served the king's court for 40 years. She'd seen every injury, every illness, every rare condition the wolf territories could produce. She prided herself on her unshakable composure. That composure shattered the moment she examined Vesper. "My king," Alara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she set down her instruments. "I need to speak with you, immediately." Valerius had been standing by the window, giving the healer space to work. He turned at the urgency in her tone, his protective instincts flaring. Vesper sat on the edge of the bed in a borrowed nightgown, looking small and confused. "Is something wrong?" Vesper's voice was barely a whisper. Of course she'd assume the worst. Of course she'd think her body had failed again. "No, child." Alara's expression was strange, shock mixed with something close to awe. "Nothing is wrong, everything is." She looked at Valerius, and he saw fear in her eyes. Not of him, for him. "Sire, we need to speak privately." "Anything you say to me, you can say in front of my mate." Alara hesitated, then nodded slowly. She approached Valerius, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My king, she's not defective. Her wolf isn't absent, it's dormant." "Dormant?" Valerius's entire body went still. "You're certain?" "I've only read about it in the ancient texts. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime." Alara's hands were shaking harder now. "Sire, she's not just dormant, she's a lunar wolf." The world stopped. Valerius heard the words, understood them, but his mind couldn't quite process the magnitude of what they meant. A lunar wolf, born once every 1,000 years. The rarest, most powerful wolf in existence. The mate destined only for... "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because suddenly everything made sense. The violent intensity of the mate bond. The way his beast had gone feral at her scent. The fact that he, a sovereign wolf, cursed to emotionlessness, had felt everything the moment he found her. "What's a lunar wolf?" Vesper asked, her voice small and frightened. Is that bad? Is something else wrong with me?" Valerius moved to her side without conscious thought, took her hand in his. "Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing has ever been wrong with you." "I don't understand." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, I don't understand what's happening." Alara approached carefully, her healer's instincts warring with her shock. "May I explain, my king?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Vesper," Alara knelt before her, meeting her eyes. "Your wolf isn't broken. It's been sleeping, waiting. Lunar wolves don't manifest until they meet their true mate, the one wolf in all the world meant for them. Their power is too immense to awaken alone. But I've been tested. Healers examined me when I was a child. They said." "They were wrong." Alara's voice was gentle but firm. "They wouldn't have known what to look for. Lunar wolves are legend. Most healers live their entire lives without seeing one. I nearly missed it myself." She gestured to the faint silver marks Vesper had always assumed were birthmarks, running along her collarbone. "These aren't scars, they're lunar markings. They only appear on your bloodline." Vesper touched the marks with shaking fingers. "I thought, my mother said they were ugly, that I was marked by my defectiveness." Valerius felt rage slam through him, cold and lethal. Her own mother had seen sacred markings and called them ugly. Had seen divine heritage and called it defective. "They're beautiful," he said roughly. "They mark you as what you are, the rarest wolf alive." "I don't understand what that means." Vesper looked between them, desperate and confused. "If I'm so rare, why can't I shift? Why have I never felt my wolf?" "Because," Valerius said carefully, sinking to his knees before her so they were eye level, "lunar wolves only awaken for their sovereign mate." The silence stretched. He watched comprehension dawn slowly in her storm-gray eyes. "Sovereign," she repeated. "You're." The alpha of all alphas, the king not by conquest, but by bloodline. He took both her hands in his. My line has ruled for 3,000 years. We're born without emotion, without the ability to truly feel because we're incomplete. We're half of an ancient pairing, destined to remain empty until we find our other half. A lunar wolf, she whispered. You, his voice was fierce, absolute. You are my other half, the reason I've been emotionless my entire life, the reason I felt nothing until I caught your scent. He pressed her hands to his chest, over his heart. You woke me up, Vesper, and I woke you up. That's what we are, two halves of an ancient prophecy. No, she pulled her hands away, shaking her head. No, that can't be right. I'm nobody. I'm the girl they threw away. I can't be some legendary. Her voice broke on a sob. You're wrong. The healer is wrong. I'm just broken and you're all being kind because you pity me. Vesper. I'm not special. The words burst from her, anguished. I'm not rare or precious or any of those things you keep saying. I'm the defective Omega who couldn't shift. I'm the burden they starved through winter. I'm the shame they couldn't wait to be rid of. That's what I am. That's all I've ever been. Valerius stood, pulled her to her feet and gripped her shoulders, firm but never harsh. Look at me. She tried to turn away. He gently cupped her chin, tilting her face up to meet his burning golden eyes. Your pack was wrong. Your family was wrong. Every person who ever made you feel worthless was wrong. Each word was a command, absolute and unbreakable. You are a lunar wolf. You carry divine blood. You are the destined queen of all wolves. And they, his voice dropped to a lethal whisper, they tried to kill a goddess. I don't feel like a goddess, she said brokenly. I feel like a scared girl who doesn't know what's happening to her. His expression softened. I know, and I know this is overwhelming. But Vesper, everything they told you about yourself was a lie designed to keep you small, to make you accept their cruelty. He stroked her cheek with his thumb. You couldn't shift because your wolf was protecting you. Lunar wolves are too powerful to manifest in hostile environments. Your wolf stayed dormant to keep you safe until you found me. How do you know that? Because I've studied the ancient texts my entire life, searching for answers about what I am, why I felt nothing, why I was so different from other alphas. His smile was sad. I thought I was cursed. Turns out I was just waiting for you. Elara cleared her throat softly. There's more, my king. He turned, his arm automatically going around Vesper's waist, steadying her. Tell me. Lunar wolves don't just carry divine blood. They carry divine power. Elara's voice was reverent. When she shifts for the first time, when her wolf finally awakens fully. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The ancient texts say it will be like watching the moon descend to earth. Her power will be devastating, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Vesper swayed. Valerius caught her, pulled her against his chest. Breathe, little one, just breathe. This is too much. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. I can't be this thing you're describing. I don't know how to be powerful. I only know how to survive. Then I'll teach you the rest. He tilted her chin up again, forcing her to meet his eyes. Just like you're teaching me how to feel, we'll learn together. What if I can't do it? What if my wolf never wakes up? She will. His certainty was absolute. Because you're safe now, because you're with me, because the mate bond grows stronger every day. He leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers. And when she does wake, Vesper, the world will bow before you. I don't want the world to bow. I just want... She stopped, as if afraid to voice it. What do you want? To be warm, she whispered. To be safe, to not be afraid anymore. You have all of that already. You're mine, and nothing will hurt you again. His voice turned fierce, protective. But you also have so much more than that. You have power. You have a throne. You have a destiny that those who hurt you can't even comprehend. She looked up at him, this massive king kneeling before truth, and for the first time he saw something new in her eyes. Not belief, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. They tried to kill a goddess, she repeated softly, testing the words. They tried to kill my queen. He kissed her forehead with devastating gentleness. And when your wolf awakens, every single one of them will understand exactly what they tried to destroy. The journey back to Silver Pine territory took 3 days. Vesper spent most of it in silence, wrapped in furs inside the carriage Valerius had insisted on, watching the winter landscape blur past. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to face them, wasn't ready to see the place that had never been home. Valerius rode beside the carriage on horseback, refusing to let her out of his sight. His army surrounded them, 500 warriors moving like shadows through the trees. This wasn't a visit. It was an occupation. On the 3rd morning, Vesper woke to find the carriage stopped. She pulled back the curtain and her breath caught. The silver pine gate stood before her, carved wood she'd passed through 1,000 times. But now, Valerius's wolves lined the walls, their golden eyes watching everything. Her former pack was trapped inside their own territory. The carriage door opened. Valerius stood there, hand extended. "Are you ready?" "No," her voice shook. "I'll never be ready." "Then I'll be ready for both of us." He helped her down, his hand warm and steady around hers. "Remember, you don't owe them anything. Not forgiveness, not mercy, not even an explanation." She nodded, unable to speak past the fear clogging her throat. Valerius kept her hand firmly in his as they walked through the gates. His presence beside her was the only thing keeping her from running. The pack had gathered in the central square. Vesper saw faces she'd known her entire life, warriors who'd ignored her, women who'd whispered about her, children who'd been warned not to play with the defective Omega. They all stared now, shock and fear written across every face. And there at the front stood her family. Her father, Alpha Gregor, looked smaller than she remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his face gray with stress. 3 days of being surrounded by the king's army had stripped away his arrogance, leaving only a desperate, cornered wolf. Her mother, Lydia, stood beside him with empty eyes. She looked through Vesper rather than at her, as if her daughter was still just a shameful ghost. And her sister, Myra, beautiful, perfect Myra who could shift into a stunning russet wolf, had tears streaming down her face. "Vesper," Gregor's voice cracked. He took a step forward. Instantly, 20 of Valerius's warriors moved, a wall of lethal muscle between the Alpha and his target. "You don't get to speak her name." Valerius's voice was ice. "You lost that right when you drove her into a blizzard to die." "I didn't know," Gregor's composure shattered. "How could I have known she was your mate? She showed no signs. She couldn't shift. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to protect her." Each word fell like a hammer blow. "She was your daughter, your pack member, your responsibility, and you threw her away like garbage." "The winter was harsh. We were starving. I made the choice any alpha would make. Any alpha would have starved themselves before casting out their own child." Valerius's rage was cold, controlled, far more terrifying than any roar. "You are no alpha. You're a coward who murdered his daughter to save himself discomfort." "Murdered?" Gregor's voice rose in desperation. "She's alive. She's standing right there." "Because I found her." Valerius took a step forward, and the temperature dropped. Frost crept across the ground. "Because I tore through a blizzard and forced my life into her frozen body. Because the mate bond wouldn't let her die. You tried to kill her, Gregor. The fact that you failed doesn't absolve you." Vesper stood silent through the exchange, her hand clenched in Valerius's. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Seeing her father try to justify what he'd done was worse than the exile itself. "Vesper, please," Myra's voice broke through. "Please, you have to understand, we didn't want this. Father said it was necessary," he said. "You watched." Vesper's voice came out stronger than she expected. "You watched him tear the cloak from my shoulders. You watched him drive me into the storm. And you did nothing." "I was afraid," Myra sobbed. "I was afraid if I intervened, he'd cast me out too. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "You were afraid," Vesper repeated softly. She looked at her sister, the one who'd shared her childhood, who'd once braided her hair and called her little moon. "I was dying, and you were afraid of being uncomfortable." Myra crumpled to her knees, weeping. No one moved to comfort her. Vesper's gaze moved to her mother. "You didn't even try to stop him." Lydia finally met her daughter's eyes. Her voice was flat, emotionless. You were a burden, a defect. I gave birth to you, but I couldn't fix you. What did you expect me to do?" The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have destroyed her. But now, standing beside Valerius with the truth of what she was burning in her chest, Vesper felt only pity. "I expected you to love me," she said quietly. "That's what mothers do." Lydia looked away. No apology, no remorse, nothing. Valerius's hand tightened around hers. She felt his rage through the bond, barely leashed. He wanted to destroy them all. She could feel it, the violence coiled inside him, waiting for her word. "Vesper," his voice was for her alone. "Tell me what you want. Execution, exile, dissolution of the pack. Whatever justice you demand, it's yours." The square went silent. Every wolf understood what hung in the balance. Ancient law was clear. A pack that harmed a lunar wolf could be extinguished, every member scattered to the winds, forbidden from ever forming a pack again. It was a fate worse than death for their kind. Gregor fell to his knees. "Please, mercy, I'm begging you." "You didn't beg when you left her to freeze," Valerius said coldly. "I'll accept any punishment, just spare the pack. They're innocent." "They watched," Vesper said, her voice carried across the square. "All of them. They watched you drive me out. They spread the story that I died of natural causes. They celebrated being rid of their shame." She looked around at the faces she'd known her whole life. Where was my mercy? Gregor's shoulders shook. "What do you want from us?" Vesper was quiet for a long moment. She felt Valerius's presence beside her, solid and unwavering. Felt the mate bond humming with warmth. Felt, for the first time in her life, that she had the power to decide her own fate. "I want you to kneel," she said finally. "I'm already." "All of you," her voice grew stronger. "Every member of this pack, I want you on your knees. I want you to acknowledge exactly what you did, what you tried to do. I want you to say it out loud." Slowly, reluctantly, the pack knelt. Warriors who'd ignored her. Women who'd whispered. Children who'd learned cruelty from their parents. All of them kneeling in the snow. "We tried to kill a lunar wolf," Gregor's voice was broken. "We tried to murder the king's mate. We are guilty." "Say my name," Vesper demanded. "Don't hide behind titles, say my name." "We tried to kill Vesper." Tears streamed down his face. "We are guilty." The words hung in the frozen air. Vesper felt something crack open inside her, not breaking, but releasing. Years of shame, of worthlessness, of believing she deserved their cruelty. It drained away, leaving only clarity. "You are guilty," she agreed. "And by ancient law, I could end you all, scatter you to the winds, take everything from you the way you took everything from me." Hope flickered in Gregor's eyes. Vesper saw it and felt disgust rise in her throat. "But I won't," she continued. "Not because you deserve mercy, you don't, but because I will not become you. I will not let your cruelty transform me into someone who inflicts suffering without thought." She took a step forward, out of Valerius's protective shadow. Stood before them alone, small, scarred, but no longer afraid. "This pack will live, but you will serve me, all of you. You will bow to the defective Omega you threw away. You will answer to the burden you tried to dispose of. And every single day, you will remember that the girl you left to die became the queen who showed you mercy you didn't deserve." She turned to her father, crouched in the snow. "You are no longer Alpha. Valerius will choose someone worthy. You will live as the lowest Omega in this pack, the position you deemed worthless. And you will understand exactly what you put me through." Gregor's face twisted with anguish, but he nodded. Accepted. He had no choice. Vesper looked at her mother. "You will never speak to me again. You gave up that right when you stood silent and watched him throw me away." Lydia's face remained empty. No fight, no emotion. She simply nodded. Finally, Vesper turned to Myra. Her sister looked up with desperate, hopeful eyes. "You will live with the knowledge that your fear mattered more to you than my life," Vesper said softly. "That's punishment enough." She walked back to Valerius, took his hand. "I'm done here." He looked down at her with something close to awe. "Are you certain we can?" "I'm certain," she squeezed his hand. "Take me home." As they walked through the gates, Leaving her former pack kneeling in the snow, Vesper felt lighter than she had in years. She'd faced her past. She'd claimed her power. She'd chosen mercy not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. Behind them, Alpha Gregor wept in the snow, learning what it meant to be deemed worthless. And beside her, Valerius smiled with fierce pride at his queen, who'd just shown more strength than any warrior on any battlefield. The great hall of the Wolf Court had been carved from a mountain centuries ago, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow, its walls lined with the banners of every pack in the territories. Vesper had never imagined standing here, surrounded by hundreds of wolves whose power pressed against her skin like a physical weight. Alphas from every region had gathered for the seasonal court, their eyes tracking her every movement with curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. She stood beside Valerius's throne, acutely aware of how small she looked next to him. He'd wanted her to sit, had actually tried to commission a second throne, but she'd refused. She wasn't ready for that. Wasn't ready to claim queenship in front of wolves who still saw her as the defective Omega from the stories that had spread through the territories. The business of court proceeded with bureaucratic slowness, territory disputes, trade agreements, requests for the king's intervention in pack matters. Vesper tried to follow along, but the weight of so many predatory stares made her skin crawl. She could feel their judgment, their doubt. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt, a few with dangerous interest. Then Thuron stood. Vesper had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. The Silver Ridge Alpha who'd challenged Valerius for the throne twice before and lost both times. He was massive, silver-haired despite his relative youth, with scars crossing his face like badges of honor. His pack was the second most powerful in the territories, and his ambition was legendary. "My king," Thuron's voice carried easily through the vast space. "I have a question regarding your mate." The temperature dropped. Vesper felt Valerius go absolutely still beside her, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "Speak carefully," Valerius said, his tone deceptively mild. "You claim she's a lunar wolf." Thuron's smile was sharp. "The first in 1,000 years, a divine mate, worthy of our sovereign king, yet she stands before us unable to shift, marked by the same weakness that led her birth pack to cast her out." He spread his hands in a gesture of false reason. "Forgive my skepticism, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Vesper's hands clenched at her sides. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building since they'd entered the court. The doubt, the need to test her, to expose her. The healer confirmed. Valerius began, but Thuron cut him off. "Healers can be mistaken. Marks can be misinterpreted. The mate bond itself can be felt between lesser wolves." His voice hardened. "But a lunar wolf, that's not a claim to make lightly. It affects succession, power, the very structure of our territories." He turned to address the assembled alphas. "How many of us have seen mates with strong bonds? How many have witnessed marks and heat and possessiveness? Are we to accept on faith alone that this girl is divine simply because our king says so?" "You dare question my word?" Valerius's voice could have cut steel. "I question only what any reasonable alpha would question." Thuron's smile widened. "Prove it. If she's truly lunar, make her shift. Let us see this legendary wolf with our own eyes. Let divine power speak for itself." The hall erupted. Some alphas voiced agreement, hungry for proof. Others shouted protests, calling Thuron's challenge disrespectful. Through it all, Vesper stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Valerius rose from his throne, and the hall fell instantly silent. His rage was palpable, frost forming on the stone floor, his eyes burning pure gold. "She owes you nothing. She owes this court nothing. I will not have my mate subjected to." "I'll do it." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Every eye in the hall turned to her. Valerius looked down at her, shock breaking through his fury. "Vesper, no, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She met his gaze, saw the protest there, the desperate need to protect her. But she was so tired of being protected, tired of hiding behind him while others questioned her worth. "He's right. They need to see. I need to try." "Your wolf may not be ready. It's only been a month." Then they'll know I'm a fraud. She heard the bitterness in her own voice, hated it. Either way, we'll have an answer. Something like pain crossed his face. If you do this, I stay beside you. No, she touched his hand briefly, felt the mate bond pulse between them. This is mine to do, alone. Before he could argue further, before she could lose her nerve, Vesper walked to the center of the hall. The challenge circle, an ancient ring carved into the stone floor. She'd seen drawings of it in books, had never imagined standing inside it. The crowd pressed closer, forming a living wall around her. Thuron stood at the circle's edge, his smile predatory, confident. Vesper closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the wolf Alara swore was there. The divine power supposedly sleeping inside her. She'd tried this 100 times in the past month, alone in Valerius's chambers, desperate to feel something, anything. Nothing came, just the same emptiness she'd felt her entire life, the same absence that had defined her. She pushed harder, remembering what the ancient texts said about lunar wolves drawing power from their mates. She thought of Valerius, of his warmth, his fierce protection, the way he'd held her like she mattered. Still nothing. The murmurs started again, louder now. Disappointed, vindicated, she heard someone laugh. Enough, Thuron's voice cut through the noise. This is embarrassing. She's no more divine than any other failed Omega. He stepped into the circle, massive and threatening. But perhaps there's another way to test her claim. If she truly is the king's mate, the bond should protect her, should give her strength beyond normal wolves. Vesper opened her eyes, saw him advancing, and understood a second too late what he meant to do. If she survives my attack, Thuron said, his smile turning vicious, perhaps then I'll believe. He shifted mid-stride, his wolf exploding from his skin, silver fur, massive jaws, eyes full of killing intent. And he lunged straight for her throat. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. Vesper saw the silver wolf's jaws opening, saw the killing intent in eyes that promised her death would prove his point. Around the circle, wolves shouted, some in protest, others in bloodlust. And somewhere behind her, she heard Valerius roar her name with such anguish it cracked something in her chest. But he didn't move, couldn't move. Ancient law held him frozen outside the challenge circle, his power useless, his rage impotent. Once a formal challenge was issued and accepted, not even the king could interfere. To do so would undermine every law that held their society together. Vesper tried to dodge, but she was too slow, too human. Thuron's claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin. Pain exploded through her body, hot and bright. She fell, hitting the stone floor hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. The silver wolf circled her, lips pulled back in what looked obscenely like a smile. He was playing with her, proving his point. Look, his movements said how weak she is, how human, how utterly ordinary. Vesper scrambled backward, her hand slipping in her own blood. Her shoulders screamed with every movement. She tried again to reach for the wolf that was supposed to be inside her, the divine power that was supposed to make her special. Nothing. Just pain and terror and the familiar weight of worthlessness crushing down on her. Disappointing, Thuron's voice rumbled from his wolf form, an alpha's trick, speaking while shifted. The great lunar wolf, the king's precious mate. He lunged again, faster this time, his teeth closing on her arm. She heard bone crack. Her scream tore through the hall. He released her, let her collapse to the stone, bleeding and broken. The crowd's noise had changed, shock mixing with disgust, excitement with horror. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Perhaps the king's judgment has finally failed him, Thuron said, circling her prone form. Perhaps he's so desperate for feeling, for emotion, that he's convinced himself a broken Omega is something divine. Another slash, this time across her ribs. Or perhaps he simply pities you. Vesper lay there, her blood pooling on ancient stone, and heard her father's voice echoing from memory. You're a drain, a defect. Go die somewhere we don't have to watch. Heard her mother. I gave birth to you, but I couldn't fix you. Heard every cruel whisper, every pitying glance, every moment she'd been told she was less than nothing. And underneath it all, she felt Valerius through the mate bond. his terror, his rage, his absolute helplessness. He was trapped by his own laws, forced to watch her die, and the agony pouring through their connection was worse than any wound. Thuron leaned down, his massive wolf head inches from her face. Any last words before I prove you're nothing special? Something inside her shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. Because she'd spent her entire life being told she was nothing. Had believed it so deeply it became her truth. Had let their words shape her reality, define her worth, limit her existence. But Valerius had never looked at her with pity. He'd looked at her with reverence. Ilara hadn't diagnosed her with failure. She diagnosed her with divinity. And the mate bond connecting her to the most powerful wolf alive didn't feel like charity. It felt like completion. They were all wrong. Every person who'd ever hurt her, diminished her, tried to kill her, they were wrong. And she was done letting their lies define her. No, Vesper whispered. Then louder, her voice gaining strength despite her broken body. No more. Rage detonated inside her. Not the hot, wild fury of a tantrum, but something ancient and cold and absolutely merciless. Rage at her father for tearing away her cloak. At her mother for watching with empty eyes. At her sister for choosing fear over love. At Thuron for thinking she was prey. At every single person who'd ever made her feel small. She screamed, and the sound that emerged wasn't human. The ground beneath her cracked. Light exploded from her body, not warm and gentle, but searing and violent, moonlight given physical form. Wolves around the circle stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. Valerius stood transfixed, his face illuminated by her radiance, his expression caught between awe and something that looked like worship. Vesper's bones shattered and reformed. Her body tore itself apart and rebuilt in a heartbeat. The shift was nothing like what she'd imagined. It wasn't transformation, it was revelation. Her wolf hadn't been dormant. She'd been waiting, growing, becoming something the world hadn't seen in 1,000 years. When the light faded, a wolf stood in the challenge circle. She was massive, not as large as Valerius, but far bigger than any female should be. Her fur was pure silver, luminescent like captured moonlight given form. And across her pelt, glowing with soft blue radiance, were the lunar symbols from her human skin, ancient marks that pulsed with divine power. Her eyes, when she opened them, were storm gray shot through with silver light. The hall had gone absolutely silent. Vesper looked down at Thuron, who'd frozen mid-attack, his confidence evaporating into something that looked dangerously close to terror. She felt her power thrumming through every muscle, felt the ancient instincts of her wolf merging with her human consciousness. She was both, now, complete, finally devastatingly whole. Thuron backed away. She stalked forward. You wanted proof. Her voice emerged as a resonant growl that shook dust from the ceiling. Here it is. She moved faster than thought, her wolf body responding to instinct honed over millennia. She hit Thuron like a force of nature, driving him across the stone floor. He tried to fight back, snapping at her throat, but she was everywhere at once, faster, stronger, absolutely relentless. She didn't just beat him, she dominated him. Every time he tried to rise, she drove him down. Every attempt at attack, she countered with devastating precision. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a lesson in hubris, a demonstration of exactly what he'd tried to destroy. Within minutes, Thuron lay pinned beneath her, his throat exposed in submission, his silver fur matted with blood. She could kill him, should kill him. The instinct was there, primal and demanding. Instead, she leaned down until her jaws were inches from his vulnerable throat and spoke clearly enough for every wolf in the hall to hear. Tell them what I am. Thuron's voice emerged broken, defeated. Lunar wolf, divine mate of the sovereign king. And what are you? Nothing, the word came out like a death rattle. Forgiven only by your mercy. She held him there a moment longer, letting him feel how easily she could end him, how completely she'd destroyed his arrogance. Then she stepped back, released him, and watched him crawl from the circle with his tail between his legs. Vesper turned to face the assembled court. Hundreds of alphas stared at her in shock, fear, and dawning understanding. She let them look. Let them see exactly what they doubted. Let them understand that the broken Omega they'd heard stories about had just become their queen. Then she shifted back to human form, graceful now, controlled, and walked naked and bloody through the silent crowd straight to Valerius. He caught her as her legs gave out, his arms wrapping around her like he'd never let go. She felt his tears on her hair, felt his hands shaking as they held her. "Mine," he whispered against her temple, his voice wrecked. "My queen, my goddess, mine." "Yours," she agreed and finally believed it. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before the hall exploded. Wolves dropped to their knees without conscious thought, instinct overriding pride, ancient recognition pulling them down before power they'd only read about in dusty prophecies. Some wept openly. Others stared in naked awe. A few looked terrified, as if witnessing the end of one era and the violent birth of another. Vesper stood in Valerius's arms, still human, still bleeding, but no longer the fragile girl who'd entered the challenge circle. Something fundamental had shifted inside her when her wolf finally emerged. It wasn't just power, though she could feel that thrumming through her veins like captured lightning. It was certainty. For the first time in her life, she knew exactly what she was. Not broken, never broken, just waiting. "The prophecy," someone whispered from the crowd. The words spread like wildfire through the hall, passing from mouth to mouth with growing reverence. "The lunar mate, the one who wakes the frozen king." An ancient alpha, his fur more white than gray, his eyes clouded with age, pushed through the crowd. He moved with the careful dignity of one who'd seen generations rise and fall. When he reached the edge where Vesper and Valerius stood, he lowered himself with visible effort until his forehead touched the stone floor. "Forgive us, divine queen," his voice cracked with emotion. "I am Aldrich, keeper of the old texts. I have studied the prophecies my entire life, and I never thought." He looked up at her with tears streaming down his weathered face. "I never thought I would live to see this day." "What prophecies?" Vesper asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Valerius's arms tightened around her, supporting her weight as exhaustion from the shift began to set in. "The sovereign and the lunar," Aldrich said reverently. "Two halves of the divine whole. The legends say that in every age of darkness, when wolfkind faces extinction, the old gods send a lunar wolf to wake the sovereign king from his cursed sleep. Together, they restore balance. Together, they rule not with fear, but with fierce love." Cursed sleep. Vesper looked up at Valerius, saw something vulnerable flash across his face. "Your emotionlessness." "Not a flaw," Aldrich continued. "A safeguard. Sovereign wolves are born with power too vast to control if corrupted by normal emotion. So the gods make them cold, unfeeling, incapable of being swayed by passion or sentiment until their lunar mate awakens them." He smiled through his tears. "You didn't just find each other by chance, divine queen. You were designed for each other, created as matching pieces of one soul." The enormity of it crashed over her. All those years of feeling worthless, of believing she was defective, she'd been waiting. Her wolf had refused to emerge in that toxic environment, had protected her by staying dormant until she found the one person in all the world meant to complete her. "How many have witnessed this?" Valerius's voice was rough with barely contained emotion. "How many have seen a lunar wolf shift?" "Only one other in recorded history," Aldrich said. 3,000 years ago. Your ancestor, the first sovereign king, and his lunar mate Selene. The texts describe her wolf as radiant as the moon itself, marked with divine symbols, larger than any female, and blessed with power that could heal or destroy with equal ease. His gaze moved to Vesper with something close to worship. "They say Selene could call down moonlight like weapon, could speak to wolves across vast distances, could sense truth from lies. That her presence alone brought peace to warring packs." Vesper felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I can't do any of those things." "Not yet," Valerius murmured against her hair. "Your wolf just woke. Give her time to remember what she is." Around them, the assembled alphas remained kneeling. Some looked odd, others calculating. A few still wore expressions of fear, not of her power, but of what her existence meant. Change was coming. The old order had just shattered, and no one knew what would emerge from the fragments. "Rise," Vesper said, and was startled when the word came out as a command that resonated through the hall. Every wolf obeyed instantly, pulled to their feet by authority they couldn't resist. She felt it then, the weight of queenship settling onto her shoulders like a mantle she'd been born to wear but never knew existed. Valerius's hand found hers, squeezed gently. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his awe, his absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. "I need to shift again," she whispered, for his ears only. "I need them to see this isn't temporary, that she's real." "Are you certain? You're exhausted." "I'm certain." He released her carefully, stepping back to give her space. Vesper stood alone in the center of the hall, small and bloodied and utterly unafraid. She reached for her wolf, no longer searching desperately, but simply opening a door that had always been there, waiting. This time the shift was different, smoother, like slipping into a second skin that fit perfectly because it was hers. The light was less violent, more controlled. Within seconds, the silver wolf stood where the broken girl had been. She was even more magnificent than before. Her lunar marks glowed brighter now, pulsing with soft blue light that cast shadows across the assembled wolves. Her size made female alphas look small. And her eyes, gods, her eyes held centuries of accumulated wisdom, ancient knowledge surfacing from blood memory. The court gasped. Some fell to their knees again, and Vesper understood that this was her declaration. "I am not your king's pretty mate. I am your queen." Movement at the edge of her vision. Valerius stepped forward, and power rolled off him in waves. The assembled wolves felt it, backing away instinctively as their king prepared to shift. Even after 32 years of witnessing his strength, seeing him prepare for transformation never failed to inspire primal fear. He shifted, and his black wolf emerged like nightmares given form. Massive beyond reason, pure midnight fur, eyes burning gold, every line of his body speaking of violence and dominance and absolute authority. He was death incarnate, the monster from 1,000 cautionary tales, the predator that made other predators cower. He should have been terrifying. Instead, Vesper felt only recognition. Her mate, her match, her other half. Valerius approached her slowly, deliberately, his massive frame dwarfing even her divine wolf. The court held its collective breath. This was the moment that would define everything. Would the emotionless king who'd ruled alone for 3 decades accept an equal, or would ancient pride demand submission even from his lunar mate? Vesper held her ground, meeting his burning gold eyes with her storm gray ones. She wouldn't submit. Couldn't, not after everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. If he demanded her obedience, demanded she kneel before his power. Valerius lowered his massive head. Slowly, with devastating intentionality, the king of all wolves bowed before his queen. The message was unmistakable. She was not beneath him, not protected property to be sheltered and hidden. She was his equal in every way that mattered. His partner, his match, the other half of his soul standing beside him, not behind him. Vesper stepped forward, pressed her forehead to his in the ancient gesture of recognition between equals. Power flared where they touched, silver moonlight meeting golden authority, 2 halves of divine whole finally, completely united. When they pulled apart, Valerius threw back his head and howled. It was a sound of triumph, of possession, of absolute joy, emotions he'd never felt before her, would never feel for anyone else. The court joined in, hundreds of wolves howling their recognition of their new queen. And Vesper, who'd spent her life silent and small and worthless, howled back. Her voice rose above them all, clear and powerful and devastating, announcing to every wolf in every territory that the broken Omega had become something magnificent. The age of the frozen king was over. The age of the lunar queen had begun. The summons came 3 days later, delivered on ancient parchment sealed with the mark of the wolf court. Vesper held it in her still-healing hands and felt nothing. Not fear, not anticipation, just a strange, hollow certainty that this moment had been inevitable since the night Valerius found her dying in the snow. You don't have to attend, Valerius said from where he stood by the window of their chamber. He'd barely left her side since the challenge, his protective instincts amplified by having watched her nearly die. Ancient law allows you to send judgment without witnessing its execution. Vesper set down the summons and met his eyes. What does ancient law demand? His jaw tightened. She watched him struggle with the answer, watched him war between his need to protect her and his respect for her right to truth. Finally, extinction. A pack that attempts to murder a lunar wolf forfeits its right to exist. Every member scattered to the winds, forbidden from ever forming pack bonds again. It's a fate worse than death for our kind. That's what the court expects. That's what the law requires. He crossed to her, took her bandaged hands gently in his. Vesper, they tried to kill you, left you to freeze to death because they deemed you worthless. Ancient law exists for a reason, to protect the divine from those who would destroy it out of ignorance or cruelty. And if I don't want their extinction? Something flickered in his golden eyes. Then that is your right as well. You are the wronged party. Judgment is yours to deliver. She looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, scarred from decades of violence while hers were still wrapped in white bandages from frostbite that should have killed her. I need to see them one more time. I need to face them as what I am now, not what they tried to make me. Then I'll be beside you. No, she squeezed his hands, felt his instant tension. This is mine to finish, alone. The great hall had been prepared for judgment. The Silver Pine pack knelt in the center, 37 wolves, every member present, surrounded by a circle of the king's elite warriors. Around them, the assembled court watched with hungry eyes, waiting for blood, for justice, for the new queen to prove she understood the weight of her crown. Vesper entered in silence, walking the length of the hall in a simple gray dress that made her look even smaller than usual. She'd refused the elaborate gown Valerius's servants had prepared, refused the crown forged specifically for her coronation next week. She didn't need symbols of power. Not anymore. Her father knelt at the front of the Silverpine group, head bowed, shoulders hunched with the weight of 3 days spent anticipating death. Beside him, her mother stared at the floor with empty eyes. Myra wept quietly, her beautiful face blotchy and swollen. The rest of the pack, warriors who'd ignored her, women who'd whispered, children who'd learned cruelty from their parents, all knelt in terrified silence. Vesper stopped at the edge of the circle. Every eye in the hall fixed on her, waiting. Ancient law was clear. The precedent was set. A lunar wolf wronged demanded extinction, and none could argue against divine justice. Alpha Gregor, her voice carried through the vast space, steady and cold. Look at me. Her father's head lifted slowly. When his eyes met hers, she saw a broken man. 3 days of waiting for death had stripped away every layer of arrogance, every pretense of strength. He looked old, hollow, utterly defeated. Do you understand what stands before you? She asked. A lunar wolf, his voice cracked. The divine queen I tried to murder. And do you understand what you deserve? Death, the word fell like a stone. Extinction for my pack, erasure from history, it's the law, it's justice, it's... His voice broke entirely. It's what we earned when I tore that cloak from your shoulders. Around the circle, wolves shifted nervously. They knew what came next. Had spent 3 days saying goodbye to each other, preparing for the scattering that would destroy their bonds forever. Pack extinction wasn't quick death. It was the slow agony of being forever alone, forever denied the connection that defined their existence. Vesper looked at her mother. Lydia, do you have anything to say? Her mother finally met her eyes. For the first time in Vesper's memory, she saw emotion there, not love, never love, but something close to recognition. You were divine, and I called you defective. I watched my mate drive you into a blizzard, and I felt relief. Her voice was flat, factual. There is no apology adequate for that, no remorse that matters. I failed you as a mother. I failed you as a wolf. I deserve whatever judgment you deliver. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was more honesty than Lydia had ever given before. Vesper turned to Myra. Her sister looked up with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. Please, Myra whispered. Please, I know I don't deserve mercy. I know I chose wrong, but please. You chose fear, Vesper said quietly. You chose your comfort over my life. That's not forgivable, Myra. That's not something I'll ever forget. I know. Myra's tears fell faster. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I failed you, that I watched you die and did nothing. That's punishment enough. The hall waited. Ancient law demanded their extinction. The court expected blood. Every precedent, every text, every recorded judgment in wolf history pointed to one outcome: destruction of the pack that had tried to destroy divine power. Vesper closed her eyes and reached for her wolf, felt that magnificent presence inside her, felt the ancient wisdom pulsing through blood memory. Her wolf wanted vengeance, wanted them to hurt the way they'd made her hurt, wanted them to understand suffering. But Vesper also remembered lying in the snow, dying, and thinking that at least the cold was finally numbing the shame. Remembered years of believing she deserved every cruelty because something inside her was broken. Remembered the moment Valerius had held her and whispered that she mattered, and how terrifying it had been to believe him. She opened her eyes. Ancient law demands your extinction, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Every precedent says I should scatter you to the winds, strip away your pack bonds, condemn you to a lifetime of isolation and agony. The court expects this. The texts require this. And you, she looked at her father, you have already accepted this fate. Gregor nodded, resignation heavy on his shoulders. But I remember what it feels like to be deemed worthless. Vesper's voice grew stronger. I remember being told I should have died at birth, being treated as a burden, as shame, as something to be disposed of. I remember every moment of cruelty, every whispered insult, every time you made me feel like my existence was a crime against your comfort. The pack flinched as if struck. Good, let them feel it. And I have learned something from the wolf who found me dying in your cast-off snow. She felt Valerius's presence even though he stood at the back of the hall, felt his love and pride through their bond. I have learned that strength isn't about crushing those weaker than you. It's about choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. It's about being better than the ones who hurt you. Hope flickered in Gregor's eyes. Vesper crushed it immediately. Do not mistake mercy for forgiveness. I will never forgive what you did to me. Never forgive that you threw away your own daughter to save yourselves discomfort. Never forgive that 37 wolves watched me walk into that blizzard and felt relief instead of horror. Her voice turned cold as winter itself. But I will not become you. I will not let your cruelty transform me into someone who inflicts suffering without thought. She took a breath, felt her wolf settle inside her with grim satisfaction. The Silver Pine Pack will live, but you will serve me, all of you. You will bow to the defective Omega you tried to dispose of. You will answer to the burden you deemed worthless. And every single day, you will remember that the girl you left to die became the queen who showed you mercy you didn't deserve. The hall erupted. Shocked gasps, protests from traditionalists, arguments about precedent and law. Vesper let the chaos wash over her, unmoved. Alpha Gregor, no, you lost that title, Gregor. You will live as the lowest Omega in your pack. You will experience every indignity, every cruelty, every moment of worthlessness you inflicted on me. And you will understand, finally, what you put your daughter through. Her father's face crumpled. He wept openly, great ugly sobs that shook his whole body. Not from gratitude, from the weight of truly understanding what he'd done. Lydia, Vesper's voice was ice. You will never speak to me again. You gave up that right when you stood silent and watched. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your remorse. I want you to live with the knowledge that you failed the one duty that defines motherhood. Her mother nodded once, her face still empty, but something in her eyes suggested she finally grasped the magnitude of her failure. And Myra, Vesper looked at her sister, beautiful, perfect Myra who'd always been everything Vesper wasn't. You chose fear over love. You watched me die to save yourself discomfort. That's who you are. That's what you chose. Live with it. Vesper turned away from them, faced the assembled court. The judgment is delivered. The Silverpine Pack lives, but they serve. Any who question this can challenge me directly. Silence. No one moved. No one dared. She walked through the hall with her head high, past the kneeling pack, past the shocked alphas, straight to where Valerius stood waiting. He opened his arms and she stepped into them, let him hold her as tension she'd been carrying for 3 days finally released. "I'm proud of you," he whispered against her hair. "I didn't do it for them," she said quietly. "I did it for me. I chose my peace over their punishment. That's what makes it powerful." Behind them, the Silver Pine pack remained kneeling, learning what mercy looked like when delivered by someone who had every right to vengeance. And Vesper walked away free, not because they'd apologized, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because she'd chosen healing over hatred. The broken girl was gone. The queen remained, and she would never again let anyone make her feel small. Vesper stood on the balcony of the king's fortress, her fortress now, watching snow fall softly on the kingdom below. Valerius's arms wrapped around her from behind, his warmth seeping into her bones. She no longer flinched at his touch. She leaned into it. "Regrets," he murmured against her hair. She thought of the girl left to freeze in the snow. She thought of the queen she'd become. "Only that I didn't roar sooner." His laugh rumbled through his chest into hers. "You roar plenty now, my moon." She smiled, a real smile, unguarded and free. She'd been left to die. Instead, she'd learned to live. And this story, this transformation, this reclamation of power, it was only the beginning. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your own experiences of being underestimated and proving them wrong. Share your rejection to redemption story in the comments below. Your truth might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Subscribe for more stories of fierce love and characters who refuse to stay broken. And don't forget to like and share with someone who needs to remember their worth. You were never broken. You were always just waiting to become whole. See you in the next story.